Is Assange home? Has it finally happened?
Assange is home, correct. So for those people that do not know, Julian Assange is a journalist and some people call him a whistleblower, but a publisher who founded WikiLeaks. So he has essentially been effectively incarcerated for the last 14 years. He spent 9 years locked in the Ecuadorian embassy in London. And then following a change of government in Ecuador, he was then essentially not allowed to stay there anymore and then was arrested by the British police and has spent the last 5 years in Belmarsh prison, which is a high security prison in the United Kingdom, typically reserved for the worst of the worst. In that time, he's spent pretty much 23 plus hours a day isolated, complete isolation. He's seen a serious decline in his mental health and physical health. It was reported he had a stroke a few months ago. So all this for doing what journalists should do, which is publishing information. So they came into notoriety after publishing and revealing United States war crimes, essentially, and United Kingdom war crimes.
Which wars were these?
This is typically in Iraq and Afghanistan, as well as, for example, revealing a lot of information in regards to the Democratic Party, Hillary Clinton's emails, etc., etc. All of these became kind of their own topics in and of themselves and controversies. Very much infamous for what I remember as a very high-profile release was the collateral murder video, which showed United States helicopter pilots in Iraq gunning down some AP reporters in Iraq at the time. And I remember this was quite a large, this blew up in the news essentially. Yep. And the footage is still out there and it's quite harrowing. And it's just essentially unarmed people getting gunned down from a helicopter gunship.
As you mentioned, 2 journalists as well.
Yes, yep. Correct, 2 journalists. So anyone can go out there and watch that. It's pretty horrible thing. But unfortunately, that was the reality of what was happening on the ground. And it really exposed... A moment like that really exposed the reality of these conflicts, essentially.
Yeah.
Not only the brutality, but also the futility of them. And that obviously made him an enemy of the, shall we say, the transnational security state, I think. Okay. So after 14 years, essentially being incarcerated, Julian Assange has returned home. And he was in the United Kingdom, hadn't actually been charged with anything yet. So in the last couple months, they had been looking at essentially extraditing him to the United States, where he was to be persecuted under the Espionage Act, which essentially would have seen him spend the rest of his life in jail and, due to his ill health, most likely perish in jail as well, which is terrifying, as he was not a United States citizen and was not in the United States. However, was still looking at being prosecuted under US law, essentially.
And if I'm not mistaken, that was one of the problems, was because he wasn't an American citizen, they were probably scared that they wouldn't be able to, under the First Amendment, that wouldn't apply. It wouldn't have protected him. It wouldn't have applied to him.
Exactly, so, yes. As, again, these supposedly only apply to naturalised US
So his defence was probably scared that if he went to America, that would have been forward.
Yeah, that would have been essentially it. So what happened is he ended up striking a plea deal with the United States government. So this wasn't really announced until it was actually happening at the time. Yep. He was flown from the United Kingdom to the North Mariana Island chain, which is a United States territory in the middle of the Pacific.
Yeah.
So we can put 2 and 2 together, obviously. That's just completely bizarre. I don't think anyone, myself included, knew that this island chain existed. However, there is a US federal court in the main island, and he was in, I believe the city was called Saipan, which is like the main capital city. There's a US federal court there. He was flown there, and he was offered a plea deal, and in which after that he was allowed to return home to Australia.
Yep.
So this is for someone that's been following this case for quite a while.
And we both have.
Yep. This is fantastic news because he is free, essentially. Yep. So he can, again, being locked up for 14 years, that would destroy anyone's life, and now he can at least return, be with his wife and children,
of course.
And enjoy, basic things like sunshine, recreation, basic human rights, essentially, that, everyone should be able to be afforded to.
However, James, I just wanted to ask you and sort of interrupt. This has set a precedent, though, hasn't it? Because he went into a plea deal and he pleaded guilty for crimes. Has this in some way set a precedent that if you do leak information that could be classified of any government, especially of America, that they can, in effect, come after you and press these kind of charges against you?
Absolutely, yes.
Yep.
So he did plead guilty, even though, in my opinion, he hasn't actually been guilty of doing anything illegal due to the circumstances of his imprisonment. I believe for him and his legal team, the most important thing was just getting him out of incarceration, which is why they pled guilty to this charge, which I believe was 5 years, I believe. And then obviously with recognition of the time he'd already spent. So essentially he can return to Australia without having to spend any more time in prison. But like you said, it has set a precedent because now legally on the record, he is guilty of said crimes, which I personally do not believe. And I'm not a legal scholar, but I do not believe he has committed anything.
He just published them. So he received the files and then he published them.
He did publish them,
That's
yes.
right.
So they were actually leaked originally to him by Bradley Manning, now Chelsea Manning, who was prosecuted in the United States.
Correct.
For, again, passing on this classified information and was pardoned by Barack Obama. I believe that was in his last day of office. He pardoned Chelsea Manning. So from there, again, Chelsea Manning was a United States service personnel. So you'd think that would apply differently to them. But again, Julian Assange, they went to great care to redact sensitive information, names, because the argument is always, well, he put, US intelligence personnel and service personnel in the field at risk. We know that there was a very thorough process on the WikiLeaks side of vetting and, some sort of censoring as well to try and prohibit this.
Was anyone injured from the information that was leaked?
Well, not that we know of. No, there's been no reported. I don't believe anyone can actually pin down this CIA, member was, undercovered and punished for that. However, the New York Times, the Guardian published information as well.
I was just going to ask you if...
And no one from the Guardian has gone to jail.
But it was the New York Times and the Guardian, possibly.
I believe they both did. Yeah. No one from either of those publications have gone to jail. And they've all since backed off, essentially. Backed off what, that position they once took. And then they've kind of backed off. And it's been quite interesting to see in the media around the world and in Australia as well specifically, all the kind of talking heads in the news have been talking about Julian Assange being released, usually quite, how can we say it, without offering too much kind of opinion on either side. But obviously there have been some people that have been celebrating his release. However, all these people were the same people that have spent the last 14 years demonising him in the media.
Right.
So it shows really the kind of lack of fortitude, I think, of lots of our media class.
Correct.
That they can just kind of flip-flop between these topics.
And also it had bipartisan support right across the political spectrum from...
It did.
Characters like Barnaby Joyce from the Nationals Party, who was a former Deputy Prime Minister at one point, to Malcolm Roberts, I believe, from One Nation.
One Nation, yeah, of course. And obviously...
Right through to the Greens and other senators from the Liberal Party. So yeah, that kind of broad spectrum support for the release of Assange, not just here in Australia, but also in America as well.
In the United States as well, yes.
Where you get a lot of some of the MAGA wing people like Marjorie Taylor Greene to the Tucker Carlsons to everyone, on the progressive side.
The progressive left side, yes.
That have supported the release of him.
And that's what's been interesting as well, because it has been not only bipartisan support for his release on both sides of the political spectrum, but we've also had bipartisan support for his prosecution on both sides of the political
it goes
spectrum.
Both ways, of course.
So we've had the kind of the John Bolton neocon type characters saying, oh no, he needs to be dragged behind chariots, he needs to spend 1,000 years in prison, he'd burn in hell, as well as the kind of more centrist, liberal, Democratic Party establishment figures who have also been saying, national security, he colluded with Russia and all this other kind of baloney that we've been fed.
A Putin puppet.
A Putin puppet, essentially. So it's interesting, and it shows, I think, it really does kind of illustrate the fickle nature of the modern left-right political spectrum
does.
in the West, of course.
It
'cause we
really
see
just melt that down, didn't it?
exactly on both sides, both opinions kind of transcending,
Yeah.
which has been very fascinating.
That's right. If I'm not mistaken, didn't they try to go after him as well at some point? I'd read somewhere that I think the CIA tried to, at one point, assassinate him.
Correct.
And poison him, possibly.
Poison him, yes. Yeah. These were reported, I believe, by Yahoo News about 2 years ago or so, where there was supposedly the CIA had plans to abduct him from out the front of the embassy. Like the British intelligence
in broad daylight,
kidnap him. Where they were gonna, I believe the idea was they were gonna plan like a an event like a car crash or something out the front of the embassy when he was being transferred, and then a bunch of men in a van, very kind of James Bond style.
It's straight out of a movie.
Straight out of a movie. We're going to whisk him away, never to be seen again.
Yeah.
Thankfully, this didn't eventuate, of course. And we can be, I think the world is a better place. The timing of this is also quite interesting, I find, because so we think, why did this happen right now? What happened inside the United States, who, in my opinion, are the party that has been pulling the strings on this whole affair? What has happened within the United States for them to decide, well, now is the moment where we're going to allow this? So I think there's possibly a few factors. Obviously, there's nothing confirmed. This is all speculation. I think coming into the election, I think lots of these things revolve around US domestic politics at the end of the day.
Of course.
So coming into the US presidential election, we've seen that Joe Biden is very unpopular. Donald Trump is also pretty unpopular. However, I think it has been put forward as an effort to kind of buy a bit of goodwill towards the Democratic Party base, the more progressive aspects, quote unquote progressive aspects of the Democratic Party base, because they can say, hey, look, we are doing the right thing. We've listened. We're letting this whistleblower who's a hero of free speech, etc., become a symbol. We're letting him go, and we're not going to be prosecuting him. So look, we're humane. We're not cruel. We're a humane party, and we understand these things, and we respond to obviously the whims of our electorate. I think as well they've lost a lot of credibility amongst that same voting bloc recently over their continued support for Israel, and I think that ties into it as well. I also believe that lots of the stuff, for example, that he specifically released, the impact, for example, the Iraq and Afghanistan wars are over now.
Yeah.
So lots of these things, although there are probably a lot of people that are very upset and would like to keep pursuing him, it's just not relevant. It's just not relevant for their current policy moving into the future.
So you think Biden could have been trying to score some brownie points?
Absolutely.
With a disenfranchised electorate?
Absolutely.
And also because those wars were so long ago that in some ways, I guess the information is almost irrelevant. People have sort of accepted what happened and moved past it.
Yes.
Yep.
Correct.
And interesting, does that dynamic apply in Australia, do you think?
I think partially.
Yeah.
I think, for example, we wouldn't have seen this under a coalition government.
Yeah.
Under the Morrison government, I do not believe this would have happened.
Yeah.
To the extent in which our current government has played a part, I'm sure there has been some diplomatic pressuring and manoeuvring.
Backdoor diplomacy was the word I believe they used.
However, this hasn't been particularly or strongly confirmed anything
No, it hasn't.
in particular.
They've been kind of tippy-toeing around the subject.
They have been tippy-toeing around the subject, absolutely, because I think at the end of the day, the Australian government is, on a macro level, subordinate to the United States at the end of the day. So I think they've had to kind of work out a save-face policy for both parties. And I think this is the end result.
They understood that it was cruel what they were doing to him, and they had domestic support to bring him home. But at the same time, you have to tiptoe around the big brother that is the imperial hegemon. That's right.
Yes, that's it.
Of course.
But look, overall, it is fantastic news.
Yeah.
And I when I heard the news, same with you, I'd never thought I'd actually see the day. So when it came out of nowhere, unannounced, that he was heading again to North Mariana Island and then to Bangkok and then home to Sydney, it was a pretty crazy moment, to be completely honest.
It was. I was following it as it was breaking, and it was it put a smile on my face.
Absolutely.
It brought me some joy.
Yeah.
So.
Well, we're happy with that.